I'm Richard Witts, I'm Reader in Music and Sound at Edgehill University, which you know is near Liverpool. But it was in Liverpool that I met John Hawkins of the post-punk band Activity Minimal. He attended the first appearance of Kraftwerk in Liverpool on the 11th of September 1975. In that month, Kraftwerk, the four members of Kraftwerk carried out their British debut tour, and I'll show you how this crazy tour went. They went up and down the M1 and the A38, far in about the country, to 17 venues of varied suitability. In Liverpool, they played at this spacious Empire Theatre, which seats an audience of 2,400. John Hawkins told me that there must have been less than a tenth at that event, around 200 fans of what was then called krautrock. And John said that they were expecting a typical krautrock hippie band of the kind they'd seen on tour from Germany. After all, Kraftwerk's Autobahn is a hippie-ish 23 minutes long. But the audience was shocked to see a quartet with neat hair and matching business suits, you know, just like the Beatles have been in 1963. In retrospect, Hawkins thought that there might be something almost punkish about their look. In those days, Kraftwerk laboured with a mixture of unwieldy and homemade instruments, and so there were rather long pauses between the numbers while they rejigged the equipment. It got a bit embarrassing. At one point, to cover the silence, the singer, Ralph, tried to talk to the audience. He asked, "Well, we know a little English. Do you know any German?" Well, yes, the Scousers, do they know any German? Of course they did. Achtung, ein Spitfire was one. Bill Shankly, über alles was another. And of course, you got the inevitable, for you, Englander, sofort, it's over. Well, what did Kraftwerk expect in a city blitzed by the Luftwaffe when, in 1941, about 4,000 civilians were killed in 80 bombing raids? I forgot to turn my mobile off, I'm sorry. I must do that. When I talked at the Science Museum, it went off in the middle. It was someone who couldn't actually find the venue and was trying to find out where to go. In any case, the war is never over, not over here. Just 1 month after Kraftwerk's tour in October 1975, the BBC broadcast an episode of Fawlty Towers titled The Germans, which satirized the supposed integration brought by Britain's entry into the common market 2 years earlier.
Don't mention the war. I mentioned it once, but I think I got away with it all right. So, it's all forgotten now, and let's hear no more about it. So that's 2 egg mayonnaise, a prawn Goebbels, a Hermann Goring, and 4 COVID salads. No, wait a minute, I got a bit confused here. Sorry, I got a bit confused because everyone keeps mentioning the war, so...
And some people seem to have carried that mindset into the 21st century. Oh, sorry. In 1999, Germany's culture minister, Michael Naumann, criticized Britain for being, quote, the one nation in the world that has decided to make the Second World War a sort of spiritual core of its national self-understanding and pride, end quote. It seems that some would now add the First World War to that objective. However, Kraftwerk can't claim to be quite so disconnected from the dark past of the Third Reich. Around 1975, it made several sly references to the National Socialist era of the 30s. For example, here's a clip from the film that was made in 1977 to promote the song Trans-Europe Express. Futuristic model train we seem to see them sitting in was in fact a replica of a real one called the Schienenzeppelin. It was developed by the Nazis using a BMW engine that was later employed to empower Luftwaffe's light bombers. The Trans-Europe Express was itself a former Nazi concept, a product of one state's desire to functionally connect its growing empire. In the song, Ralph talks of traveling from Paris to Vienna, two of the chief annexed cities. Similarly, on the cover of Radioactive of 1975, the radio depicted is called a Volksempfänger DKE-38. A shortwave radio issued by the Nazis and known sarcastically as Goebbels' Schnauzer, the snout of propaganda minister Goebbels. There's also the original cover of Autobahn of 1974 to consider. The Autobahn itself, a National Socialist innovation, where the bourgeois Mercedes passes a Volkswagen, the people's car, first put in production in 1937, following Hitler's order for a vehicle that could transport 2 adults and 3 children at 100 kilometers an hour. This intriguing scene is composed in the manner of the approved Nazi style of genre painting, that is, idealistic yet realistically drawn images, almost cartoonish, promoting Heimat, love of homeland. The image could have come from Germany in the 1970s or the 1930s. Now, why is Kraftwerk doing this? Why is it teasing us with these references to Nazi technology? The Autobahn cover is painted by Emil Schult, an artist on the Düsseldorf scene, out of which Kraftwerk also sprang. Schult played guitar with Kraftwerk in 1973, and he went on, more importantly, to finesse their aesthetic outlook and help shape them into the corporate men machines by which they gained global success. Here they are in 1973, and here they are in 1975. As this photograph identifies the players through the neon signs, it gives me that opportunity to point out that from the start, Kraftwerk were really comprised 2 musicians. There's the singer and keyboard player Ralph Hutter and the flautist Florian Schneider-Esleben. The other people have been employed by Ralph and Florian. Now, this claim may seem unjust to the others who have made distinct creative contributions, but it's a fact. Schult, Hutter, and Schneider-Esleben were part of a greater critical cultural movement in West Germany. Now, this faction was unhappy with the way the post-war Germans pretended that there was a big gap between 1933 and 1945. That 1945 was itself Stunde Null, the year 0, as if Hitler and his swastikas had never, ever happened. It was left to radical authors, filmmakers, and other artists to confront this hypocrisy. Butter once claimed that, quote, "We have no fathers." A comment which echoes a general complaint of the time about the refusal of parents to discuss the war. But the phrase, as used by Ralph, is ironic, because Florian Schneider-Esleben's father was rather well known. He was the architect who designed this. It's the Manners Man, now as you can see, the Vodafone Tower of 1958 by the River Rhine in Düsseldorf. And here's another of Paul Schneider-Esleben's buildings, the Cologne Bonn Airport, which he was working on when Ralph first met Florian. These buildings are pure, modernist Stundennull style, based on principles formed at the Bauhaus in the early 1930s under Mies van der Rohe, before Hitler closed the place down. In contrast, Emil Schult had been a student at the Düsseldorf Academy of Art in the late 1960s, where three great artists taught, each of them grappling with the Nazi past and making it visible. There was Joseph Beuys, who called himself an idiot under a felt hat. Beuys stimulated debate with his enigmatic performances that often made references to his wartime past as a young fighter pilot. Then there was Gerhard Richter, whose Uncle Rudy in a Nazi uniform he provocatively depicted like a blurred snap. Richter integrated the figurative and the abstract, just as Kraftwerk were to do in their 1975 album Radioactivity. I'm told that Emil Schult studied with both Beuys and Richter. Lastly, there was Anselm Kiefer. Using lead, gold, ash, and straw, he made architectural subjects copied from the Third Reich. Here's his painting portraying a superhuman wood-beamed hall burnished by torch flame. It's called Germany's Spiritual Heroes, Geisteshelden, and the hall itself is the Geisteshalle. In 1969, Kiefer stood in places conquered by the Third Reich and made Nazi salutes. I mean, the image is absurd, a little man dwarfed by bleak landscapes. Yet, there was an aggressive gesture in a society where artistic representation of Nazism was legally banned. A little later, Kraftwerk took the shiny new everyday objects of the Third Reich, its cars, motorways, trains, rails and radios, and like Kiefer, presented them in an ironic, utopian glow. Much of this, of course, was missed in England because of the subtlety of what Kraftwerk did, together with our ignorance of Germany, despite our negative fixation with it. But I suspect that there was a further influence on the formation of the men-machine Kraftwerk, and this stimulus came from England.
Bend, bend, just a little more without you, baby. I'm so insecure that you can make me feel that I am sure I got a sickness. Only you can go so just relax, just that sometimes I please, oh please me, try to please me.
Gilbert and George, of course, are two artists who turned themselves into living sculptures. Encouraged by Joseph Beuys, they visited Düsseldorf's Kunsthalle in 1970 and followed that up with an appearance in the city every 2 years. Dressed in smart suits, Gilbert and George displayed impeccable manners while at the same time giving rise to discomfort. These living sculptures were described by a German critic as, quote, rigid and hollow men, devoid of personality. The imitation of mechanical forms and processes are recurrent motifs. Now, I believe the presence of Gilbert and George in Düsseldorf played a part in the artistic evolution of Ralph and Florian under the impact of Schult. This change is reflected in the music, too. It fascinates me how Kraftwerk could move from this in 1970 to this in 1977. Sometimes it just clips the beginning of that. It annoys me so much. It just clips it just there. We were a beat short of what you should have heard. Very annoying. Anyway, this is part of a general trend in the 1960s onwards. I mean, the earnest technology of modernism was used to serve the nimble games of postmodernism. To my mind, this helps to explore Kraftwerk's very name, power station. Ralph and Florian used it in a period when the hippies of the alternative scene backed a grassroots movement against the nuclear power. I see Kraftwerk as part of that critique of that, which poked fun at the Green movement's regressive nostalgia for a pastoral idyll to which the Nazis were also prone, the Heimat. Kraftwerk came clean, so to speak, in 1992 when the band took part in a Stop Sellafield concert in Manchester. Following the Fukushima nuclear disaster of 2011 in Japan, Kraftwerk joined the bill of an anti-nuclear concert in Tokyo. In recent renditions of their song Radioactivity, Ralph has added lyrics in English referencing, quote, a contaminated population. This is a rare example of Kraftwerk clarifying what was originally opaque, or at least opaque to the English. The radioactivity of that album in 1975 with the radio set on the cover suggested that the theme was that of the sounds spreading through the ether. It's one of Kraftwerk's most ambitious albums. It mixes the folk-like world of German neoclassic composer Karl Orff with the avant-garde cosmology of German avant-garde composer Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. Up to then, Ralph had sung in German, as we hear on Autobahn. I was one of those who thought they were singing fun, 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 when in fact we're singing fun, 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 fun. But thanks to the international attention gained from that fun, fun, fun song, he started to sing alternately in German and English, a verse of each. However, the most exposed and revealing reference yet to their name, Kraftwerke, power stations, stayed in German. In the track titled News, 6 overlapping newsreaders of the different Federal Republic radio stations describe the developing state of nuclear power. The West German station tells us that 50 power stations are to be built in West Germany. The North German station reports that there will be 2,000 nuclear power stations by the year 2000. Meanwhile, the announcer with the very thick Bavarian accent compares the developments to that of space travel. I'll play you.
Hier ist der Westdeutsche Rundfunk mit Nachrichten. 50 Atomkraftwerke sollen...
This is what it sounds like. It's not just a bad tape.
Jedes einzelne kann eine Millionenstadt mit Strom versorgen. 1985 soll in der
Weltweit sind nun schon 355 Atomreaktoren in Betrieb. Nach dem Plan zu Atomenergiewörter sollen es mit 1000 bereits mehr als 2000 sein.
Die derzeit bekannten Uranvorkommen reichen gerade aus, die Summe des Deepwater befindlichen Reaktoren eine Betriebszeit von 40 Jahren zu versorgen.
So it's clear and opaque at one and the same time. Eventually, Kraftwerk released albums in separate English and German versions. The music remained the same, but not the vocals. Here's a small but intriguing difference in one of the band's most famous songs, The Model. It's different by one word, or rather one voice. Here's a clip of the German version. Play the game because it's the correct was added in the German version by the barman of Kraftwerk's local. In the song, the model is drinking champagne, Sekt in German. And the bartender would often try and get clients to buy champagne by shouting at them, Sekt, correct. So there's more in it, you see, than But my research, my academic research, is much more devoted to the music than the lyrics. And it's the material that generates the concert that you're about to hear and see, Kraftwerk Uncovered, A Future Past. I first proposed the idea of this to Icebreaker. I based it on some research I did for an essay in a book on Kraftwerk. I noticed that there were musical links, connections and developments between what I call the forgotten first 4 albums, Organisation, Kraftwerk 1, 2, and Ralph and Florian, are the 4 forgotten albums, and then the 5 famous albums starting with Autobahn, Radioactivity, Trans-Europe Express, The Man Machine, and Computer World. So I noticed these links and connections between these albums, and these albums, the 4 of the 5, produce 59 tracks, and I analyzed each of those in terms of key or mode, tempo, and instrumentation. And this is an extract, this is from numbers 10 to 19, the titles in the third column. And so it's the timings, the tempo, the keys, for some of them, like Kling Klang number 10, is 3 improvisations that were clipped together by the producer Connie Plank. So they're in kind of alien keys from each other. But he has a sharp ear to connect them so that they don't sound so different from each In the last, oh no, it's the next one, sorry, the next table, I think. Yes, the sections. Many of these early tracks were improvisations that were, were Connie Blank put together. And so I logged these distinct sections, and I think it's the previous one. Yes, that's right. It is the previous one. The very final column is what I call radical moments. These are the strangest moments in Kraftwerk's output that probably don't relate to tonality or anything, where they're just interested in the timbre, in the sound, in the strange sound. And so I tabulated those periods because I thought they might be of use to the composer and to be slightly correct. So those are the sections, and then from those I did the typologies. I was able to link these sections as types. So here you see all the tracks out of the 59 that start with rhythmic rather than organic opening. So the rhythm is right there at the beginning in these particular tracks. As you can see, not many out of the 59 start in that way. I then fused the sections and the moments together to show Icebreaker how it could work as a continuous piece of music. Of course, when the composer Jan Peter Schwarm came into the project, he had his own way of working the material. He was interested in superimposing different the early and the late, sorry, the forgotten and famous tracks. He tried those out as experiments, and he lives in Frankfurt, and he would come over from Frankfurt with his latest experiments, and we listen to say, that's terrific. That one maybe doesn't quite work so well. That sort of worked in that kind of way, and so we've ended up with I think 6 pieces, 6 separate pieces. So it's not quite continuous in that way. They do follow on as a kind of suite. But there's one aspect of this sound world which is not Kraftwerk's, and that is something I ought to explain a little bit about, of course, and that's the sound of Icebreaker itself. Icebreaker is a small orchestra, an ensemble is the boring word, I suppose, of 13 classically trained virtuosi who wish they were rock stars. And by that I mean that they play amplified and without a conductor. Icebreaker was created in 1989 to play at a festival devoted to the music of the Dutch composer Louis Andriessen. And Andriessen is a highly influential composer associated with a style known as post-minimalism. If you know the 1970s, minimalist sounds of Americas, such as Philip Glass, Terry Riley, and Steve Reich. Well, Andriessen sounds like Steve Reich being mugged down the back alley. Post-minimalism is the closest you find to composers writing rock music. At the same time, it retained the processes of repetition and of modality and of driving pulse associated with minimalism. And of course, over 30 years, it's proliferated by various means, and Icebreaker's repertory presents a wide range of responses to the initial thrust of Louis Andriessen. You'll hear some of these in the first half of the concert. Kraftwerk Uncovered takes up the second half of the concert. But in Jan Peter Schwarm's way of working with Kraftwerk, he does something that reminds us of the way that Kraftwerk started playing live instruments, such as Florian's flute, and progressively rendered them electronic. Schwarm gives back to the live instruments what had become electronic, and in turn transmits that into the domain of the digital. In Peter's case tonight, the live digital world. He's the guy who looks like the DJ at the front working these machines. He's taking sound samples, live sound samples from the instruments, and he's working them and sending them back out. His intention is to completely integrate that with the live material, so you can't tell whether it's whether it's him or whether it's the instruments. That's the intention. And I heard the rehearsal just now, and it worked. So I'll give you 4 typical examples of how Kraftwerk's material links up through the years. So to give you an idea of what we were working with. The first example concerns a piling up and interlocking of notes that are what we call in music theory the interval or distance of a fourth. Bom, 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 bom. Those are the 2 fourths. Here we hear Florian's piled up flutes in 1970s Rückzug. And then here it is, same idea later in Tongeberger of 1973. In 1977, one of the most powerful motifs in popular music. Now, a second example is the characteristic bass line of the bands. Here's a Kraftwerk bass line from Tone Float, their earliest recording track from 1969. It's a typical, what we call tonic dominant, 1/5 shift between octaves. But it's the octaves that are significant. That's the recording. It's not. It's a band. It sounds like it has that horrible to it in the original. Here is 1972. We hear the 5th below the tonic as well as the dominant. So the 5th below and the 5th above. What in music theory we call a functionless subdominant. Well, I hope you're getting the idea. It gives us, in turn, in 1974, the famous bass line of the B section of Autobahn. The third example is what I call electronic grooves. It's a rather trippy moment that occurs when electronic processes take over and they sort of modify the timbre of the riffing instruments. There's an early example from Tone Float of 1969. similar process in Ruckzuck of 1970. Fully flowered in 1974 in the section that a friend of mine calls the stoned section of Autobahn. You can imagine them passing round a joint in the car. Final set of examples, of course there are other examples I could have given you, but is what I call the footstep. It's a slow, rather menacing, measured tread. Now I know that Peter Schwarm was interested in this because he opens the piece with it. That's what the bass drum's doing there. So I thought I'd include it. So we find it early on in Stratovarius of 1970. It appears in Mitternacht of 1974. It opens the album Radioactivity of 1975. I'll stop it there. I've actually got loads of that. Now, I was kind of interested to see how long I could play it before going, stop it! Here's a final example in one of the most famous of their songs, Hall of Mirrors, of 1977 or 8. Of course, you will have immediately noticed the bass line was in the formula that I've mentioned just a while earlier. In Britain, Kraftwerk's reputation grew with the evangelistic help of other artists. David Bowie had Autobahn disc played to audiences at his concerts. Joy Division's Ian Curtis insisted on playing Trans-Europe Express to his audiences before he came on stage. Joy Division's bassist Peter Hook told me that he once saw Ian dance to Trans-Europe Express, kicking broken glass around the disco floor until the bouncers threw him out. Kraftwerk, which has only Ralph left in the current form, can now perform to huge audiences in this country rather than to the tiny ones, the 200 krautrockers in the Empire Theatre of Liverpool in 1975. But the gap of perception may still be as wide as that noted by John Hawkins when the Germans first played in Liverpool. He told me, quote, "They gave us a little demonstration of some new technology they had developed. It allowed them to synthesize the sound of the human voice, so they said. They pushed a few buttons and a voice speaking German came out of the PA. I think most of us were bewildered, not very clear what was going on. But the fact that I didn't understand it made it all the more mysterious. Years later, this is John speaking, I worked with the German producer Zayas Held. He told me that it was a little joke. The voice was actually a roadie with a microphone backstage. Maybe the speech itself was funny. Who knows? But it was in German. It was lost on us. End quote. As we now know, this loss was more than a matter of language. Well, I've reached the end of my autobahn, and it only remains for me to say, ja, tvoj sluga, ja, tvoj rabotnik. Thank you.